Kirsten Screen, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here. I can't wait to dig in.
Yeah, me too. So you shared, well, first of all, your penmanship's fantastic. So congratulations on that.
I find that interesting you said that because I find my penmanship atrocious and I had to try really, really hard to write this legibly. So you're
Well,
welcome. This
well
was my
done.
best effort. You got my
Uh,
best effort.
yeah, best efforts, well received, fantastic. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Um, so your paper napkin was your business has to align to your life, not the other way around, or you'll find yourself burnt out and resentful of the work and the process. Why did
Yes.
you share that with me?
I'm going to say it's because it is the fundamental reason that I started my business and the reason that my business has turned into what it's turned into. It is what everything that I do comes back to in the end. If I don't like doing it, we're not going to incorporate it in the business. It has been my motto from the start. It's how I help my clients. And it probably came from a very deep rooted dislike for what I was watching adults in my life do while I was a child and how they were involved in their own businesses and their own employment. And I just didn't want that life. So it's a deep rooted passion of mine. If I don't like doing it, if it doesn't put my life first, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, so a lot of napkins are about attraction. They say, "Oh, this is a thing that," but for yours, it feels like it's equally about doing something, but also about not doing something. So let's talk about the not doing something, like this burnt out and resentful.
Yep.
Where does that come
Yeah.
from?
Funny that you notice that because to me it is as much about not doing the things that you're not going to love as it is about doing the things that you do love. So I'm going to say it came from two places, two very important men in my life, coincidentally. But first, my dad. My dad was a lifer for his company. He worked for a large German corporation, and he gave his life, not literally, but his life's blood to that business, almost literally, because he had a massive stroke after he retired. Thankfully, he's still with us. But I watched him spend his entire life putting work first, putting business first. The family had to move because the boss said so. The family had to stop doing this because the boss said so. My parents couldn't go on a planned vacation because the boss needed him for a last minute thing. And everything under the guise of it's going to pay off one day. And then, he quit his job eventually or was done, retired, and had a massive stroke that completely changed the course of his life afterwards. So that was definitely a huge impact. So not wanting to do what I saw him do was prevalent from the very beginning. He had that stroke right when I was finishing my formal education. So it was that pivotal moment of I'm now going to go find a job, but like not like that. So he's the first, but the
Yeah.
second is my husband, who is a serial entrepreneur who has done the opposite of my dad and has always pursued his dream and always built businesses that were to his liking and what he wanted to do. But he's gone the other way with it, where the passion has almost taken over, where and he knows this, we've talked about this, he's downstairs right now, so he'll know that I'm talking about this, but he can get so caught up in the passion of it all that he forgets that we still have to live a life. That is like, oh, well, we'll get to that when we have time. It's almost a self-imposed prolonging the work. It's a self-imposed postponing of the life and the fun part. And both of those were such extremes directly in my path that I was like, ew, no, I don't like any of that. I want to still live my life. I want to enjoy our children. I want to enjoy life now, not in 40 years when we retire.
I find it fascinating that both extremes sort of manifest themselves in the same way, right? Like
Yep.
it's almost like either side of the spectrum leads to the same place.
Yeah.
Why was that? Like, why is that, do you think?
Well, I think because my husband so much rebelled against the traditional, but he still was struggling for a really long time with understanding that passion should nothing in my opinion in life should take over, right? And I'm a mother of three, so I can say that my children are not my purpose. I love my children. I would die for my children, but they're not my purpose. They shouldn't be. They should be their own purpose. I should be my own purpose. My job is not my purpose. The work that I do with the women in my life, that I coach and mentor, that's not my purpose. My purpose is fulfilling what I want to do in my everyday life and doing the best I can to impact those around me positively. But I think the reason I saw such extremes is for my dad, it was a means to an end. I'm going to give everything because it'll pay off in the end. And my husband is the opposite of that. I'm going to do everything I love to the extreme right now, but then I'm going to accidentally sometimes forget that, like, I also want to see my family. So, two extremes, but it still comes down to giving everything in order to achieve something. And as a result, you're just kind of neglecting the part of like, but does it actually fulfill the life you want to live in that process?
Yeah, I find it really interesting that you're really grounded in purpose. Like you said, purpose, purpose, purpose a few times, right?
Mhm.
So obviously purpose matters to you. And I'm going to say it's not common
Yeah.
for me to speak to female entrepreneurs who are so grounded in I'm going to do this for me
Yeah.
early on.
Yes.
Like you learning that's not,
Mhm.
and I'm not trying to be gendered, but that's not
Yeah.
usual, right?
Correct. Correct. It's not usual and it's not often well received, but there's a reason I am this way now because if you and I had had this conversation 10 years ago, it would have been a very different conversation. I
Mm.
always joke with my husband that for a long time I felt like stage crew in my own life. Have you ever known somebody who's in the theater, right? My kids have done through school and whatnot, and they've been stage crew. You're wearing all black, you're in the background, you make sure everything's set up for everyone else to succeed in the spotlight. And that was my role for a really long time from childhood on. My mom was always stressed out because my dad was always gone for work. My brother was doing his own thing. I was kind of the person that was keeping it all together. We moved across the Atlantic. There was a bunch of upheaval and a lot of different things. So my role very early that I took on was I got to make sure everyone's happy. I got to be the funny one. I got to not have problems. I got to make sure everybody is okay. And it was all about everyone else. Well, and then I got married, and my husband, like I said, has been a serial entrepreneur from the beginning, and he's in IT, which is obviously a much more lucrative place to be in than a lot of what I do from an entrepreneurial perspective because I'm in the services industry, the health and support services industry. The money's not the same as it is in IT. So he had these opportunities. And I said, of course, yeah, I'll quit my job. I'll stay home with the kids because we had 3 kids very quickly, no family support. Someone had to do that. So I took on that role. And I did that for a really long time so he could thrive. And I have no regrets over that. But we did that for a long time. And then COVID hit. And then I stopped and I said, but you know what? Like I've been doing for you and for them and for them and for them and for them. And like, what about me? And when me, because again, I watched my dad do for others from a work perspective for so long, and in the end, he got nothing. He had a stroke, right? So circling back to what you said, it isn't common and it isn't well received, but it's also, I don't think, natural for me to say my purpose first. It was the result of everyone else's purpose first for 20 years. And eventually I just said, but I don't want to come out of like none of us come out of this alive, right? Like none of us come out of this process alive. I don't want to at the end go, well, but I never tried the thing that I wanted to do. I never put what I wanted to do for all these years first. And you're all fine. I've taken care of you. You're fine, but I'm going to do it now.
Was that hard to find?
Yes, and it's a very it's a guilt-driven thing, I think, especially once you're a mom because it feels selfish to say
Yeah.
I want my purpose first. But I've also learned in that process, my kids are better off because of it. My kids now have an attitude of when I go after my dream, not if, which they wouldn't have had otherwise. They would have had we do the thing that we're told to do and go get the job and, wait for instructions and so forth. My kids are sometimes to a fault, which as a mother is very difficult, very strong minded people as a result, because we've raised them to see that you do actually have the right to do the thing that brings you purpose and joy. And you can still make a living off of that. And you can still support other people. You can do all of those things, but you do at some point have to say, what's important to me has to happen first.
Yeah, and it's like it's that old adage, right? If you're in an airplane and it's going down, they say
Yeah,
put your mask on before helping the person next to you, so you're not KO'd
correct.
before you actually help the other
Yeah.
person, right? So if you are a helper, you need to take care of yourself. Um, so it was hard. It was hard for you to change gears. It felt selfish.
Yep.
How have you gotten clean with it now?
Yes. But which is not to say it's not sometimes a struggle, right? I have 3 teenagers now, 2 teenagers and a preteen. But it's a lot. Like they need a lot of things. And sometimes I have to say I can't be there for that thing and I can't do that thing right now. But the beautiful piece, and this goes back to the paper napkin, make sure your business fits into your life. I prioritize the things that I know are going to have the biggest impact. Whether that is right now, I have to prioritize this one thing because this is a massive financial impact on the business that in turn will help the family. Or right now, I have to postpone this meeting because my kid's in the volleyball playoffs and I'm not missing that. And I get to make that choice because I have chosen to build the business in a way that, of course, it needs to be financially viable. Otherwise, we don't have a business. But if it doesn't fit into my life, I'm rejecting it. I will not take on that client if that client is going to prevent me from doing what I need to do in my life.
So have you found yourself burnt out and resentful? Like, have you been in that situation, or did you know to create that moat before you got to that point?
I wish I could lie to you and say I was that smart from the start, but I was not. Most of us aren't because I think we also always underestimate how little it takes to be burnt out and overestimate how
Mm.
much we can take on, right? So when I first decided, okay, I'm building this business, which by the way was a very like I called a family meeting, and I'd never called a family meeting before, but I called a family meeting and I said, we're all meeting in the living room. You're going to sit down and you're going to listen to me. And I explained to my kids and my husband, here's what I want to do, and it's going to require some extra time and help from you guys, and I'm not going to be available quite as much and so forth. So the goal was from the very beginning, I'm going to build it in a way that makes me happy and doesn't take away from the family. But then also things started to take off rather quickly in my business, which is also a little bit intoxicating, right? Like, oh, but like here's more, and we can build this more, and I
And they
can take
like
more
me.
clients,
And
and
yeah.
they like me, and it's amazing, and everybody wants to work with me. So no, I can't say that I was smart enough from the start. I was very burnt out in the first probably 6 months of my business. I was working 12-hour days. I had a lot of clients. I had a wait list 20 people deep, which was amazing. But at the same time, I no longer saw my kids for dinner. And it went against everything that was my original purpose of doing this, which was to have both sides and fit it into my life, hence the paper napkin.
Mhm.
So yeah, I had to learn it the hard way, even though I knew better from the start.
You said something real quickly, underestimate how little it takes to be burnt out. I
Mhm.
think the conventional wisdom is otherwise, right? I can endure this.
Mhm.
Why are you saying the opposite from that?
Because I think most people build a business based on what they think they should be doing, not based on whether it's going to pay off for them personally and financially in the long term. I think a lot of us like to jump on, as I did in those first few months. Well, here is the easy carrot dangled in front of my face. This is quick, easy money I can take. I can take on this client. But we don't think about the fact, well, now I'm going to commit the next 6 months of my life and time and energy to this client. But then tomorrow, here's another person who also wants to become a client. Well, that's easy money. Let me just take that real quick because it's not a big deal in the moment, but we don't think about the cumulative effect of what we build. And sometimes it can scale very quickly, which is a blessing. But also, we sometimes lose sight of this quick scaling has exponential effects that we're not going to see for 6 to 8 months. And suddenly, 6 to 8 months later, if you're not paying attention to the nuance of it, you find yourself in a position where, without realizing it, you have burnt out because you have built this beautiful prison, this gilded prison that you didn't realize was closing in.
Yeah, and it speaks to me when you say that because success is an awful teacher, right? I mean, it is a horrible teacher.
Mhm.
And one of the things that it doesn't teach well is how fragile it is, right?
Yes.
Too, because
Yes.
success is fragile. And it's never owned. It's
Right.
rented. And if
Right.
we don't take care of these things personally, if it's not serving us, we can't do it, right? We can't keep being successful, correct?
I 100% agree. And I love what you said that it's rented. And nobody thinks about that either, right? Oh, I've made it. Well, but we've never really made it. You're currently doing well. But it can also, I have been an entrepreneur long enough and married to one long enough to know that when there's an up, there will be a down. Like that's just
Mhm.
almost inevitable. There will be a down. It's whether or not you persevere through that, which is my entire point with how I've built my business. If it cannot adapt with the seasons of my life and the seasons of the business, then I'm not really building something for longevity. Then I'm building something for right now. But right now does not serve me or my family in the long run. Can this sustain as not only the business shifts and obviously things like COVID and external things that are going to change how people spend money or economic reasons and so forth, but also the variables that change in my own life. When my husband and I first built our first big business, that took off and got acquired and all of this, my children were 1, 3, and 5 years old, which is a very different circumstance than now I have a 12, 14, and a 16-year-old. And to all the moms and dads out there, everyone thinks it's really hard when they're little. No, it's it's very physically difficult when they're little, but the hard part comes when they're older because now my circumstance has shifted to where the things they need from me are much more emotionally draining than what they needed from me when they were 1, 3, and 5. So my business has to be able to adapt. And if I don't plan ahead for that, then it's not going to be a sustainable reality. And as you said, it's borrowed at that moment.
Yeah, on the subject of kids, when I was growing our business, we had little kids. They're
Yeah.
2 years apart, just like yours.
Yeah.
So mine were just little babies, and we had three kids under five at one point, 1, 3, and 5. And I remember one of my colleagues, one of my employees, had older kids, older teenage girls. And I was like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. This is like, so all hands on deck at zone defense. It's horrible. And she said, she smiled at me. She put her hand on my shoulder. And she said, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. And,
100%.
and I never understood it until now. I've got a
Yeah.
college freshman, and I've got a junior, and I've got a high school freshman,
Yeah.
and it's a different world. So
Your kids are exactly like mine, and it is. I think these are the lived things that I don't think you understand and know ahead of time until you're literally going through them. But it's so true. It's, the problems with small children are physical. It's mechanics. It's, like you said, zone defense. How do I get three people to sit still in one room while I take a phone call? But the problems now, I literally right now before you and I got on here, I had my 16-year-old message me because she just took her PSAT and said, "Can you call the school and let them release me early? I want to come home." And it's like, I can't deal with this. Right? I'm in the middle of something, and no, you have to stay at school. The problems are different. But the reality is when I know that the business that I've built and my husband, who's also an entrepreneur, if the two of us can't work that out to support that, then in my opinion, I'm not doing the right thing as an entrepreneur or a parent, because the goal of both for me has been to make my family better and life easier. I don't want to run a business and have it be harder than me just going to work at a 9 to 5, because at least if I go to a 9 to 5, I have a guaranteed income every month. I collect a paycheck, I go home, I don't worry about it. That's simple. Running a business is not simple, right? It requires a lot of risk. It requires a lot of variables. It requires a lot of aptitude and endurance and tolerance for uncertainty. So
mhm.
if that does not gel with my life, then that's not worth it to me.
Yeah. Kirsten, you said something real quickly, and I'm just curious about it. When you talked about yourself as an entrepreneur and a mother and and then you said it doesn't work for me. So what is your routine? And I know that you have one because you're
Yes.
too disciplined not to. So what is your routine for every day, putting what Kirsten needs that
Yeah.
day on the radar? Because if we don't put it on the radar, it doesn't get on the radar, right?
It
I mean,
won't
that's the
happen.
other thing. It's not like this stuff is a sensory beam and somehow we just take care of ourselves. No,
Right.
all of us will put ourselves at the bottom of the line. And you saw that with the two
Yes.
men you were talking about too, right?
Yes.
So this
Yes.
this is not just a female thing. It's a
No.
male and female
Mhm.
energy thing. So how do you put yourself on the radar?
So it's going to seem really cliche, but I promise I have literally done this since the age of 17. I get up at 4 a.m. And people ask me all the time, why do you like? No, I don't like it. Who likes getting up at 4 a.m.? Nobody. If you ever ask a person who tells you they like getting up at 4 a.m., they don't. They're just used to it. So I'm used to getting up at 4 a.m. The two things that are of vital importance to me, I need mental space of quiet. I need to not have people around me all day, every day. That's how I recharge. I have a very quickly draining social battery. So if I don't have that opportunity for me to have some quiet, I don't function. And I will not sacrifice my workout because it is how I let off steam. So I have gotten up at 4 a.m. since I was 17 years old. I started senior year in high school and I was like, I don't have time after school to do these things. So I got up early in the morning and I started working out, and I have done it through college. I did it through grad school. I did it while I was pregnant. I have done it through every business. I've done it with little children. The flip side question I always get, when do you go to bed? At 9. I go to bed at 9. I am that old lady that goes to bed at 9 o'clock, come hell or high water. I don't care what you want from me. I'm going to bed at 9, which now means with 3 teenagers, they tuck me in and I tell them good night and I say, make sure you get yourself to bed. That is my non-negotiable. And my family knows that. My husband works out as well. He knows he is not allowed to be in our workout space between 4 and 6 a.m. because that's my time. And that is my one thing that I have always put my foot down. It is absolutely non-negotiable.
So I'm gonna. Were you a college athlete? Were you an athlete?
I was a high school athlete. I was not a college athlete, intramurals and such, but I was a high school athlete. But I will tell you that discipline did not come from team sports, because I'm also not a person that does well in team sports. Again, I think that goes with the social battery. I'm a person that does really well under my own motivation.
Yeah, no. So that I picked that up from what you were saying, but I wanted people to hear that you didn't do this
Yeah.
because you were an athlete,
No.
because you needed it for your coach and the basketball team was telling you to do this. You did this for you. It's pretty self-aware as a 17-year-old to know that you needed this. Like, what was your inspiration?
um my parents, and again it goes back to by seeing what not to do. And I adore my parents, they're wonderful humans, they took good care of us, but my parents did not physically take care of themselves. My dad did not prioritize time for himself whatsoever. My
Mm.
mom was very disappointed in never fulfilling her career dreams because they were always thwarted by my dad's "we have to move again," company said we have to move, so she just always gave up her career. And I watched these two people not be happy on both extremes of that spectrum by never doing the thing that they actually wanted to do. So I said, but like, I want to do this thing. So I'm just going to do this thing. And I don't know if at the time at 17 or 20, I would have been able to verbalize that this is, for my well being. It just felt good. I felt better doing it. Do you know what I mean? I felt
Yeah.
better knowing I got up in the morning and I had quiet time alone in my house. My brother and my mom both also are night owls, so they would be awake forever. So there was never alone time. I knew the only way to get alone time in my home growing up was first thing in the morning. And I knew the only way to get alone time in college with roommates was to get up when everyone else was sleeping because they were going to be up until 2 a.m. So I knew I wasn't going to outlast them to get alone time at 2 a.m. I was already
Yeah.
exhausted. So I just knew I'm just going to be the person that goes to bed early and I'll just get up before they get up. And that's how I get my alone time. And I just somehow instinctively knew I was going to be better off by recharging that way.
That's really, really cool. I want to talk about the social battery part
Yeah.
too. I think a lot of, so you've used that term a couple times,
Yeah.
and I think that's important to you. I like to talk about it as energy buckets. So we've got different energy buckets, and we've got to make sure that they're plentiful. And if they're
Uh-huh.
not, we just hear the pinging at the bottom of a pail. We've got nothing to give.
Yeah.
So your social battery, people will say, Kirsten, you're a social person. You're on a
Mhm.
podcast. You're doing this. What are you talking about? Social battery. Don't you get charged up by all this? And the answer is what?
The answer is it depends on what we're talking about and who it's with.
Right? Yeah.
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 If you
Okay.
put me in a room and I have to make small talk about the weather with 20 people for an hour, I will need a 3-day nap afterwards. It will drain me to the core. But if you put me in a room and we're having this kind of conversation, or you're talking to me about your hopes and your dreams, or you're explaining to me that thing that happened to you right after college that made you build this business, like I can talk to you for hours. I can be on my podcast for hours. I can do these kind of podcasts for hours. But if you were sitting here right now and you were asking me interview style questions of what's your favorite color, like what did you do when you were 7 when you had to make lunch, I will be bored to tears and I will just simply fade away and I'm going to need to recharge after that. I don't do well with small talk. I do really well with talk to me about your purpose, talk to me about what you want to do, talk to me why this matters to you, and that lights me up. But anything beyond that, it's not for me.
So you were forced into discipline pretty early because you said you watched, your parents in this
Yeah.
situation and you needed to be the easy one, right? You need to
Yeah.
make things easy. I'm going to guess that you did well in school. I'm going to guess that you stayed quiet, right?
I was the kid you didn't have to worry about. And you know what they say about kids you don't have to worry about, what we turn into as adults. Yeah.
Worry about them, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's really interesting that you learned that, or you trained yourself that way.
Yeah.
Um, how have you made it different for your kids?
I love this question. And only a parent would ask that question, by the way. I have done a whole lot of work of figuring out why I am the way that I am, which not all of it is positive, right? Like we talk about discipline, but a lot of that we also know becomes a protective way of just let me compartmentalize the things that make me upset or feel like they're inadequate or the empty buckets and let me just figure out how to deal with it. I want my children to know that they can make as much noise and disagree with me as much as they want to and need to, if it's important to them and if it's based on their passion and their viewpoint. I will never ever shut down their viewpoint, even if I don't agree with it. I will never ever shy away from a enthusiastic discussion with my children. And I forget who said it, and I wish I could give credit to this person, but I read this somewhere once that if your children are willing to argue back with you, you know that they feel incredibly safe in your home. They feel like their voices are going to be heard. They feel like whatever they want to do, you will be there to support them. So it has been a very conscious effort on my part to make sure that I encourage every dream they have. We will, and not to the degree of, sure, do whatever. Let's do that for 3 weeks and then try something else. No, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. You said you wanted to do this. So let's give that, a real college try. And then if you decide this isn't for you, sure, let's try a different thing. But they're all incredibly motivated because they know that they have a safety net, but they also are allowed to disagree with what's in this home. They are allowed
Yeah.
to be who they want to be. And if they tell me they need space, I don't ask 1,000 questions. I'm like, okay, I'll see you when you're back. My husband will ask questions because he didn't grow up in a house like I did. He's like, what do you mean you need space? Are you okay? What do you need? And I'm like, no, they just need space. And we're just going to let them have space, and they'll come to us when they are done having space. And those things are fine with me.
Yeah, and you know that by your own experience, right? Because you were the
Yes.
quiet one because you
Yes.
didn't want to create that. And
Correct.
and I was reminded this, one of my best friends said to me, "Yeah, you've got three kids who will give you hell because they
Yeah.
know that you're going to love them on the other side. They
Yes.
know that you're going to be safe on
Yes,
the
that's
other
exactly
side."
it. That's exactly it.
And
But that only works when you have emotionally mature parents. And my parents, through
still sucks in the
circumstance,
moment, just
oh,
right.
100%. As a parent, it's the worst, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. And I say this to my husband often. I feel like I'm sort of bookended by I couldn't be that as a kid with my parents, and now I have to control all of my emotions with my children so they turn out better. But so like the whole time I had to control all the emotions and I had to be the emotional mature one, which again, the kids deserve that. I didn't deserve that when I was the kid. But I think it's like you said, out of necessity, we see that and we want to do better. And the
Yeah.
buck stops with me, right? The generational buck stops with me of yes, you get to live your dream and you get to disagree with me. And I just think it's cool to watch you. And like, I love you no matter what, in the end, like we're going to be okay on the other side of it. So like you're giving me hell because you're a teenager, but like I'll love you through it and you're going to be great on the other side.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about a little bit of, I want to go back to something we were talking about. Um, and it's something that entrepreneurs do a lot of,
Yeah.
and parents do it too, right? Building for right now, making something better for right now. Here's the iPad that makes
Mhm.
it easier for me to have dinner right now,
Yep.
but there's a long-term consequence. So conflicting priority, I call this a little bit of
Mhm.
conflicting priorities. And there is this tendency of entrepreneurs to want to build for right now, forgetting the long term and
Mhm.
forgetting their social battery, their energy battery, their energy buckets for the long term. And you've learned this, you've come by it naturally, not without pain, but you've
Yes.
come by it naturally. How do you keep the light on for that balance? Because it's not just, and I think this is a problem in society today. We have publicly traded companies that are all about
Mhm.
quarterly priorities and
Mhm.
quarterly earnings, but
Mhm.
and completely forgetting the long-term priorities along the way. And falling in this death loop around quarterlies, quarterlies,
Mhm.
quarterlies, quarterlies.
Mhm.
And now AI is forcing strategic planning right down
Mhm.
in the same way. So because of the speed of change, so there's a necessity in being
Mhm.
short-term minded in this rapidly accelerating world. How do you build for right now and not have conflicting priorities?
Yeah. And I think the short answer to that is you don't, both things aren't true at the same time, right? Like you're not going to have no conflict and be able to do this. You're going to have conflict. It's going to feel weird. You're going to have times when you're like, I just want to do this one thing and not worry about further consequences. You just have to make a conscious decision not to do that. The benefit that I always say as small business entrepreneurs, I'm not a publicly traded company. There are no shareholders. I don't have to answer to somebody else's whim of, but I want to see this now. The closest thing to that I have to this day is my dad, because he'll still go, what's your profit margin this quarter? And I'm like, I could tell you, Dad, but it's also not relevant because I know what I'm building for 2 years from now. This is not what I'm here for right now. I'm going to credit my husband, honestly, with a little bit of it because he is the eternal optimist. And it does not mean I'm not by nature, if you haven't caught on, but I am not an eternal optimist by nature. But he is, and he didn't come from a upbringing that would make you think that would create an eternal optimist, but he simply is. But he has from the very beginning had a clear vision, specifically when we built our first IT business together, of what his 5-year plan was, his 10-year plan was. And even in the moment, if he made decisions in the moment that made no sense to me, because I was like, but right now this is going to be less money for us, but right now this is going to mean this, he could see the big picture. And I had to learn that. That was something that I had to look for from a business perspective over time. From a personal perspective, I kind of, like you said, picked that up just by experience. But I think that if anything made me want immediate gratification more from a business perspective. And I had to learn that that wasn't going to pay off in the end, that diligent work with big picture vision was going to build us the life we wanted. It was going to give the big financial reward, maybe a little bit later than if we made strategic short-term decisions, but in that same time would also allow us to live the life that we wanted. That it's like we don't need to buy all the things. We don't need to have 7 houses and the fancy cars and all of that. Can we go to our kids' volleyball games? Can we be at soccer? Can we do these things? Are the clients still happy? Are we making money? Is this stacking over time to where eventually this is the 5-year plan?
And I think this goes back to your napkin, right? This is why it has to align to your life. It is not this or, it's this
Right.
and they
Yes.
have to be pointed in the same direction. And alignment is not a one and done thing.
Right.
It is something that has to be regulated.
And alignment's also not balance. I think a lot of us confuse alignment with balance because, as a parent and an entrepreneur, it's never balanced. I'm
Yeah.
never, 50-50 mom versus entrepreneur. I'm never perfectly in the middle of any of those. Sometimes I'm too much on one side and other times I'm too much on the other side, but over time, as you said, the direction of both aligns and we're going toward a common goal with both of those pieces. There is no work-life balance, especially as an entrepreneur. You have chosen to take on the work. You are the work. You are it. You are the business. No matter how many employees you have or whatnot, you are still the driving force of the business. So alignment does not mean balance, and alignment does not mean it always perfectly works out. It just means you can hold the vision through the ebbs and flows as long as you know we're going into the right direction.
Yeah, I've always one time I was working with a group, and the group said that the entrepreneur is like the big umbrella, and
Yeah.
everybody else has these little umbrellas underneath the big umbrella, but you're the big umbrella, and you
Yeah.
have to keep your umbrella open
Yeah.
and aligned. If it's off to the side, then you're leaving people out.
I
And I
love
think
that.
that's
That's a
what you're
great
talking about.
analogy.
Yeah. Kirsten, I feel like we could do this for hours, as
Mhm.
you said earlier on, but our time is up for today. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. This was amazing. I enjoyed this.